Aloha. Welcome to the Mr.G podcast. This is episode number 11. We're going to be talking about previous NBA basketball champions, but it's okay if you don't like basketball because you will by the end of this broadcast. Or Mr. G, me, I have a way of explaining things, telling stories, and making it interesting for those of you that don't even watch sports. Now, I don't do a script here. This is episode 11 of the Mr. G podcast. The Mr. G podcast is available wherever you get your podcast at Amazon Podcast, Apple Podcast, Spotify Podcast, iHeart Music Podcast, and the full episodes of the Mr. G podcast are immediately uploaded on Twitter and YouTube, so you can catch those there. All right, with that being said, today's episode is brought to you by my twin brothers, Smelly Socks. You can find my twin brothers, Smelly Socks, in the New England state area, probably in a dark forest or a dingy basement. Okay, with that being said, we're going to talk about previous NBA champions and what I was doing that time. I have a superior memory. I have what you would call a superior autobiographical memory. I essentially remember every day of my life. Now, I don't normally know what day it was or day it is. Like, what's today? Monday? I don't know. So it's hard for me to recollect, but if I think about it long enough, I can tell you what I was doing on any particular day. And so that's fun to do with world events. Every Christmas, every Thanksgiving, every Halloween, I spend a few minutes of that day and I look back and reminisce about what I was doing in previous years and how I can improve on such. So we're going to do that today with the NBA finals. This is that time of year. The Western Conference Finals are decided. Denver Nuggets are waiting to see if they play the Miami Heat or the Boston Celtics. The Miami Heat took a 3-0 series lead over the Boston Celtics before the Celtics won Game 4 in Miami, and they won Game 5 last night in the Boston Garden. Game 6 is on Saturday, and that is a hot ticket in Miami. Game 6, it's the only basketball game in town. It's the only series going on right now. I imagine courtside seats for the Miami Heat Game 6 are going to be in the $40,000-$50,000 range at least. So good luck to Jimmy Butler and the Miami Heat on Game 6. Now, like I said, it's that time of year, and I've been watching basketball since I was a kid. So almost 40 years, 35 plus years I've been watching basketball. Now, the earliest seasons that of basketball, I can't really remember when I wasn't a fan of the sport. I was just a kid and I just saw it. So the earliest NBA champions that I remember are the Detroit Pistons. And I remember seeing a shirt back in the day, like in the 80s and 90s. Each NBA champion would have a shirt, and the shirt would have the whole team on it, like in a cartoon like pictogram. It's funny. Spotty decided to come out just during the podcast. He's like, "Hey," just like when I was making the videos on the street, Spotty Cat would come out and be like, "I'm in the video." Now Spotty's out here. It's like, "Hey, I'm in the podcast." Congratulations to you, Spotty. All right. So yeah, the earliest I remember was the Detroit Pistons, and they had back-to-back champions in 89, 90. And I remember seeing a shirt, the Bad Boys shirt. A lot of people, a lot of young kids at the school I went to, was probably first grade, second grade, maybe. They had the shirts that said the Bad Boys, and it had all of the players on it. And I remember staring at the players, like not having toys as a kid. A shirt like that was like the most interesting shirt, so you could stare at it for hours and look at each individual player. So the very first NBA players that I actually learned was like Bill Laimbeer and Joe Dumars because it had their names on the shirt. All right. So I'm still a kid and playing in the neighborhood and stuff. And then I remember summertime, and it was the NBA finals were happening. And I was at a friend's house, which was a big deal because me and my twin brother, we weren't always allowed inside other kids in the neighborhood's houses because we were known as like the Dirty Brandt brothers. And so this new kid, their parents were yet to forbid us from going there, which they would. in a week or two. But let us in their house, and we were determining whether to play Nintendo or watch the TV. And on the TV was a basketball game, and the Chicago Bulls and the Los Angeles Lakers in the NBA Finals, Michael Jordan's first championship. And I remember the kid had like Lakers stuff in his room, and then he's like, "Oh, we don't need to watch. Lakers are gonna win. They always win." And then I was just thinking, like, he could be wrong about that. This Michael Jordan player might be pretty good. And that kid ended up being wrong. I never saw him again after that day, I don't think. But he was too embarrassed of his shame. No, we were just kids and we weren't basketball fans. But that goes to show, even back then, the Lakers mentality was like, the Lakers are the best. Lakers are number one. This was before Jordan, before Kobe, and before Shaq, before all of those championships. And also, to backtrack once, that one of the earliest basketball memories I have is of, it's a Laker Spurs memory, and that was Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, one known as one of the top five players of all time. He was doing his farewell season. Like before the season, he was like, "This is going to be my last season," and so every arena that he went to, they had like a special uh, novelty thing where it'd be like, "Oh, it's Kareem's last season, yay Kareem!" Farewell to Kareem. And when the Lakers came and played in San Antonio, there was a big hype with T-shirts and posters. It's like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar's last time playing in San Antonio. And the thing is, me and my twin brother, we had two older sisters that were 4 years older than us, and we were the ones, like, we ended up loving basketball. But our father went to that game, and he took our sisters and not us. But that's not even the half that's worst of it. It's like, we must have, you can look up to see how old I was. So old me and my twin brother were, because we were born in 79 or 80, and so this was sometime in the 80s. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar's last game in San Antonio, Texas. And our father, he was too cheap to get a babysitter for me and my brother. And so he not only took our sisters to the game, who didn't even like basketball, but he instead, acted like me and my brother had gotten into trouble for something. And he made us stay in our room for like 5, 6 hours straight with no TV, no radio. And we just sat there. And I remember, I swear, you're not supposed to swear, but I remember me and my brother talking and saying, "We didn't even do anything wrong. Why are we supposed to stay here?" And a couple of times we'd like creep out and look, and like we'd try to, convince the one or the other to go down and try to sneak some food. But we stayed in our room the whole time. And they drove to downtown San Antonio and drove back to the suburbs. And then when they got back, like late at night, like we were told that we were in trouble and we couldn't leave the room. And I remember speaking with my brother, being like, "We didn't do anything wrong," and us speaking, let's say, we exactly said, "Remember this as adults, that we did nothing wrong, and that they just punished us for no reason, and that we have to stay in this room and go without food, and we did nothing wrong. And remember that as adults." And I did remember that. So to my younger self, hey, I remembered. but they got home and it was like 10 or 11 late, I remember. And they weren't all upset with us. We're like, coward, like we didn't want to get beat with a belt or anything, which was happened a lot. But they came home and they were all happy, and they had posters and T-shirts. And then they were like, "Oh, sorry, you boys had to stay home, blah blah blah. But here's a poster of Kareem Abdul-Jabbar." And then, so like, they gave us this, like, the free poster that everybody got at the game. And so me and my brother are like looking at it like, should we hang it up? Our room was empty with no toys, nothing. So all we had was this Kareem Abdul-Jabbar poster. And we put it up briefly, but then me and my brother were like, "What do we even have that up?" We watched wrestling at that time before we got into basketball. But this crunkly old free Kareem Abdul-Jabbar poster. And it was one of those posters where you like stand next to it, except it wasn't an actual size. It was like the size of a magazine. And so it still had a ruler and everything. But it's okay, Spotty. But you're right on my shit, Spotty. So looking back, that was one of my first basketball memories. But That must have been Kareem Abdul-Jabbar's last season. I don't know what that was. So the Detroit Pistons, I remembered them, and then the Detroit Pistons. I don't remember them playing the Portland Trailblazers, and but I remember them winning. I don't remember seeing the finals or anything. But the Chicago Bulls versus the Los Angeles Lakers, Michael Jordan's first championship. He had to get through the Pistons to get to the NBA Finals against the Lakers, and they beat the Lakers in 5 games. I remember seeing that briefly. And then the next summer, it seems like so much time passed between those 2 summers. In 91, I was a kid playing Nintendo. And then in 92, I was a different kid playing Nintendo, an older kid. And in 92 was when I hung out, me and my twin brother Michael hung out at the Brooks family house. And the Brooks was a black family that lived in my mom's neighborhood. And me and Michael just thought that was the coolest places that we've ever been, because they would let us sit down at dinner. They would always have good food with each other and watch TV, and everybody would go grocery shopping, and everybody would play games together. And it was just such a community, totally unlike anything me and my brother had ever experienced in our own home. So we loved uh, hanging out at the Brooks houses. And that summer of 92, they joked that we were part of the family. But, it didn't, we ended up drifted apart because we had just such differences in our cultural backgrounds, so to speak. But in 1992, I watched the NBA Finals, and that was the first NBA Finals that I watched from the whole games, and I didn't get bored or anything. And I was at the Brooks house, and it was the Chicago Bulls versus the Portland Trailblazers. And Brandon Brooks and Thomas Brooks were their 2 sons. And I remember when we were watching, I wanted to say something like I knew what I was talking about. And after the Bulls won the championship and they were celebrating, I was like, the Bulls won't win next year. They're old. And then Brandon Brooks got offended, and he's like, the Chicago Bulls aren't old. Michael Jordan isn't old. Scottie Pippen isn't old. You know, Craig Hodges isn't old. Uh, Steve Kerr isn't old. Uh, I don't know the exact players, but he named the top players. Bill Cartwright isn't old, but he looks old. And I remember watching that NBA Finals and watching Michael Jordan with the repeat because they had beat the Lakers the previous year. And then in 1997, or excuse me, that was 1992. Then in 1993, the Chicago Bulls beat the Phoenix Suns. And that was the first year after hanging out with the Brooks family and playing basketball every day. That the next season, I was an NBA fan, and I watched the whole NBA season. And that was a legendary season. That was the season that Charles Barkley won MVP playing for the Phoenix Suns. And I remember he had a last second shot with 0.5 seconds left during the regular season on TNT, because all the games were on TNT back then too. It's funny how Charles Barkley was a exciting player on TNT games, and then now he's a TNT commentator. It seems like he's always been a commentator. But that year he won the most valuable player when he played for the Phoenix Suns. The Spurs were a heated rivalry, and it seems like the Spurs could never get out of the second round, but they had a really good team that year. And me and my brother were big Spurs fans, and we watched every year. And then at the end of that year in the playoffs, the Charles Barkley and the Phoenix Suns played the San Antonio Spurs, and the Spurs played them good for the first 5 games. But in game 6, uh, the uh, the Suns had a 3-1 series lead, and the Spurs were up by 1 point, and it was one of Charles Barkley's only buzzer beaters, and it was in the playoffs too. And they gave him the ball at the top of the key, and then he just went up and shot the ball and ended the Spurs season that year in I believe the second round of the playoffs. And me and my brother were just so heartbroken. We were about 12 years old, and I remember just shedding tears. And I knew the whole starting lineup for the San Antonio Spurs. It was uh, David Robinson, Terry Cummings, Willie Anderson, Avery Johnson, and Vinny Del Negro. No, they got Vinny Del Negro later, and of course Tim Duncan later. But I don't remember. There's one player that I'm leaving out, but anyways, So that I remember that year that and the Phoenix made it to the NBA Finals that year when they lost to Michael Jordan and he capped the three-peat. And then during that summer, Michael Jordan surprisingly retired to become a baseball player. That was the year. The next year, the Houston Rockets won against the New York Knicks, and that was their first championship in 1994. The next year, in 1995, David Robinson had one of the best statistical seasons on record, and I think he won the scoring title. He scored 71 points. He almost top rebounds in the league, top blocks in the league, top steals in the league, and he won the most valuable player award. But Akeem Olajuwon took that personally in 1995, and they had a legendary Western Conference Finals, Akeem Olajuwon versus David Robinson, where the Spurs had home court advantage, but they lost the first two games at home. And then they came out and won the next two games in Houston to tie up the series. And then they each traded wins on game 5 and game 6. And then game 7, Akeem Olajuwon just put on a show against David Robinson. And you can look up the highlights, and he made David Robinson his bitch, basically. He took David Robinson behind the shed and made him his bitch. And with all these like moves that, people are still imitating today. And that's the pinnacle of Akeem Olajuwon's storied career in 1995. All right. Then 1996, Michael Jordan comes back and they have Tony Kukoc. They have a few other great players, and they start the first of another 3 repeat when they beat the Seattle Supersonics. And then in 97, they beat the Utah Jazz. In 1998, the Chicago Bulls again play the Utah Jazz, Michael Jordan's last championship and Michael Jordan's last game as a Chicago Bull. And I remember that was this first summer I moved to Austin, and everything had changed in that time from 1998. It seems like kind of like in 2020. When you look at things now from 2019, it seems like an eternity ago, and everything changed after 2020. Even everything just looks different too. Everything sounds different. TVs and screens look different. Computer apps act different. Computers work better. Phones are way different from 2020 and on. And 1998 seemed like the same thing. And I remember being in Austin for the first time in the summer of 1998. And my sister didn't watch TV, so she had this TV that she never used. She used the VCR though. And so I put on the game, but it was just so odd having like the NBC broadcast, and it just looked so strange coming through the wires in Austin, Texas, like nothing I'd seen before. And Michael Jordan won the championship there. And I remember watching one of the games at a friend's house that I was buying pot from. He had like dreadlocks, and he was like in an interracial relationship, and they had a young baby and everything. And we were like blowing a blunt on the outside, listening to Bob Marley. And I was just thinking like, oh yeah, I'm cool. But that was 1998, and I don't want to go further than that. I'll save the Spurs first championship 1999 for tomorrow or the next day. But I can tell you the championships of the Houston Rockets, New York Knicks. I saw that while I was working with the San Antonio Express News when I was 14 years old. And our boss, John Ornelas, took us to a bar to watch the game. And he told the bartender that we were his kids, so we were able to drink alcohol in the bar. He did that in 1994 and in 1995, where the Rockets. I thought that they played the Indiana Jazz, but apparently they played the Houston. Oh yeah, they played the Orlando Magic. That's right. It was Shaquille O'Neal did make it to the NBA Finals, and I remember watching that sweep. And Olajuwon did make Shaq look bad as well. Uh, but yeah, and then 96, 97, those kind of just like blend together. 98, though, I told you, was the first summer in Austin watching Michael Jordan's last championship. And then the next year, 1999, this San Antonio Spurs somehow become a dynasty, and it's the start of a dynasty, and win the NBA championship. Before 1999, you would never have predicted the Spurs to be an NBA championship. You just couldn't predict it. It's like saying the Sacramento Kings are going to have an NBA dynasty. In basketball, you have to believe. It's the most important thing. All right. So as far as teams winning championships, back the Spurs are one of the top teams of winning championships. They've been to the finals 6 times. They've won 5 of them, right? All right, so they basically have the best winning percentage of any NBA Finals team. Now, the team with the most championships are tied. It's a tie between the Lakers and the Celtics. Each of them have 17 championships. But the Lakers have been to 32 finals, as the Celtics have only been to 22. So the Celtics are 17-5 in the NBA Finals, and the Lakers are 17-15 in the NBA Finals. So you usually if the Celtics go, they win it. All right, number 3, you wouldn't believe it, is Golden State Warriors with 7. And how many of those came recently? How many championships does Steph have? 3, 4, 4 or 5 now. They won last year. So, most of those came within the last few years in 2015, 17, 18, and 22. So 4 of the 7 came within the last few years. So basically in basketball, even though they've had championship, the NBA since the 1940s, the same teams since then always win the NBA championship. The Lakers, the Celtics, until recently. And then the next on the list is the Chicago Bulls with 6 championships, all of them from Michael Jordan. Before Michael Jordan, the Chicago Bulls were the Atlanta Hawks or the Sacramento Kings or the Orlando Magic. They had never won a championships. And that shows how you really in basketball you need a single player or a single event or something just to change the culture, as to put. All right, next on the list, San Antonio Spurs, 5 championships, 6 appearances and only 1 loss, an 83% winning percentage. And like I said, before 1999, the Spurs weren't known as a championship team. They were known as a Sacramento Kings team, an LA Clippers team. They were about as LA Clippers. Like they'd won a few playoff series, maybe made it to the conference finals once or twice, but never a championship. Next up, the Philadelphia 76ers. They won championships in 1950s, the 60s, and the 80s in 3 different decades for 3 championships, spread way far apart. Next up, Detroit Pistons. They had the back-to-back championships, 89 and 90, what we talked about. And then the recent championship in 2004 when they upset a stacked Laker team, and they did it without a superstar. They did it with teamwork. They did it with great coaching, and they did it because I was cheering for them as well. So next up, Miami Heat. They won 3 championships. In 2006, Dwayne Wade and Shaquille O'Neal pulled a championship out of their ass. Before 2006, the Miami Heat, the same thing. They were the Orlando Magic. They were the Atlanta Hawks. They were the Utah Jazz. They'd make it to the conference finals, but they'd never win a championship. Now they have championship culture. If they didn't win those championships before, those shots this year by Jimmy Butler don't go in. Because in basketball, it's mental. You have to believe in basketball, unlike any other sport, maybe soccer. All right. So now every other team has only 1 or 2 championships. So the Miami Heat, the Detroit Pistons, the 76ers, the Spurs, the Lakers, the Celtics, and the Warriors. Those are the only teams with more than 2 championships. And they've been playing NBA basketball for decades, almost 100 years. It's unbelievable how the same teams always win. But like I said, again, it's the power of the mind. It's the placebo effect. People have cured cancer with a sugar pill just because they thought it was some magical pill that was going to cure their cancer. The same thing can be said in basketball. The same teams win every year. You will never expect the Sacramento Kings to play the Atlanta Hawks in the NBA Finals. Even the Denver Nuggets, it's taken them decades to get to the point where they're just respectable enough to make it to the NBA Finals. They had to have a game-changing, culture-changing player that's unlike anything anybody has seen before. Same with the Orlando Magic with Shaquille O'Neal. All right, and other than that, a lot of teams have never won championships. The Phoenix Suns, the Utah Jazz, the Brooklyn Nets, the Orlando Magic, the Chicago Stags, the Washington Capitals, the Indiana Pacers, the Denver Nuggets, the Charlotte Hornets, the Los Angeles Clippers, the Memphis Grizzlies, the Minnesota Timberwolves, and the New Orleans Pelicans. A lot of them, have been around for years and years, since the 50s too, and they still have never won championships. They still, cannot get that mindset. You look at the city of Atlanta, it's one of the largest cities in the United States. And in baseball, they had a lot of success with the Atlanta Braves. They put the same kind of money into the Atlanta Hawks as they do with the Atlanta Braves. But in basketball, it's different, because in basketball, you just have to believe. Like the Houston Rockets, they have two championships, 94 and 95. Those 2 years I talked about in Akeem one. But when you think of Houston Rockets, you think winner, you think playoffs. But really, they only have two championships, but those two championships last for decades. All right. The Cleveland Cavaliers, they have one championship. All right. But they just seem like above a lot of the other teams just because they have that one championship. But in all those years with LeBron James, out of all those finals appearances, they only have one championship. The Milwaukee Bucks, they won the championship in 1971, and then they won it 40 years later in 2021. So that's how rare an NBA championship is. The Milwaukee Bucks culture, you just thought of them as a joke for so many years. They would barely make the playoffs, and if they did, they were the 7 or 8 seed. I remember they had a few good years with Ray Allen and Vin Baker. But they were always pretty much a joke, and they needed a game-changing player. They needed a player who you couldn't even pronounce his name, and his nickname is the Greek Freak. Any player named the Greek Freak, that's a game-changing player. And that 2013 NBA draft, I watched the whole draft because I don't know why. It was boring as fuck. But there were some non-basketball people that I also forced to watch it, and they asked me who I thought the best player was. And I said the best player was Giannis, and I said his nickname is the Greek Freak. And that's the player that I chose to profile and talk about to the other non-basketball players, because I felt he was the best representation. Like, hey, trying to get somebody to like basketball. Look at this guy. His name's Giannis. He's pretty cool. So, but yeah. So in basketball, you really have to believe. Like, you have to believe that in not only your city is a winner, you have to believe that your team is a winner, and you have to believe that that ball is going to go in the shot. That ball is going to go in the basket. Now, I've been blessed as a Spurs fan. The Spurs are my only team. I started watching them in 1989, and they've been a dynasty. They've had the highest winning percentage in sports. And when they make it to the finals, from the very first year that they played in the NBA Finals versus the New York Knicks, I told everybody, hey, if we're going to make it there, we're going to win it, And I believe that my cheering and my defense from home, blocking the other team's shots and cheering them on, I believe that had an effect too. I'm a dark empath, and I say it jokingly, but it is 100% true, and that did have a serious effect. And it's not a coincidence that the Spurs have the highest winning percentage in sports, and that they're my team, and that's where I'm from, because I'm a very, very fucking special individual. And being a dark empath is not all giggles and kicks, all right? I can feel electro vibes, all right? I've been studied by science. They've offered me $250,000 to study these things that I can do, all right? And I can feel people's energy. So this apartment's a great example. I'm in my apartment with my windows and doors shut, but your electromagnetic field is like 6 feet. So you have this invisible wavelength of like 6 feet or 10 feet, but mine extends even further. An example is whenever there's trouble around, or somebody that doesn't like me, or somebody that has ill will towards me, my toes always curl. They don't literally curl, but I get that sensation that they curl. And I'm a totally analytical and objective person. So I've done my own double-blind studies testing this theory. Like I said, I'm not going to go into detail, but I've been able to do other things as well. As far as music goes, you can really feel music. And if you've ever met me, or if you ever know me in person, it's something that I don't even need to explain. So with that being said, we're going to end today's episode 11. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Tomorrow I'll talk more about previous NBA finals and where I was and what I was doing. Because that's what you got to hear. It's going to make you a better person. But I appreciate it. Once again, these podcasts are available anywhere you find your podcast: Amazon Podcast, Spotify Podcast, Apple Podcasts, and you can get the full episodes on Twitter and YouTube. I love doing this. I really have fun doing this every day. It's something that I want to continue doing. So I'd really like to share it and get it out to as many people as possible. Everybody have a great day. And for me and my street kitties, we bid you aloha. Shoots.